The European Union has serious concerns about the US Inflation Reduction Act, saying it breaks international trade rules according to an official document seen by CNBC. The European Union called on the US to amend certain tax benefits contained in recently enacted green legislation given what it called their discriminatory natures and warned of potential retaliation. The bloc wants Washington to remove discriminatory content and production requirements in the Inflation Reduction Act and to receive the same treatments as other US trading partners. The sweeping tax, health, and climate bill was approved by US lawmakers in August and includes a record $369 billion in spending on climate and energy policies. The landmark package includes tax credit for electric cars made in North America and support US battery supply chain. European officials have acknowledged the green ambitions associated with the package, but they are worried about the way that the financial incentives under the act are designed. The EU listed 9 of the tax credit provisions that it has an issue with. Speaking in Brussels, the EU trade chief said, "We have established a task force to deal with this issue. We are currently concentrating on finding a negotiated solution. Hopefully, there is willingness from the US to address the concern which we are having on the European side," Dobrovskis told CNBC. It had seemed like the bad blood between Brussels and Washington was easing on Biden's watch. Over this year, Russia's war against Ukraine has meant that America and Europe need to present a united front, at least politically. Cracks are now starting to re-emerge. The EU is furious that US is pouring subsidies into the homegrown electric car industry. Accusing Washington of protectionism, Europe is now threatening to draw up its own defense. Unsurprisingly, France's President Emmanuel Macron is leading the charge. The Americans are buying American and pursuing a very aggressive strategy of state aid. The Chinese are closing the market. We cannot be the only area the most virtuous in terms of climate, which consider that there is no European preference, Macron told French Daily. He called on Brussels to support consumers and companies to buy electric cars produced in EU instead of ones from outside the bloc. The most prominent concern for Europe with the Inflation Reduction Act is clean vehicle tax credit, but they are not the only ones, said Miriam Garcia Ferrer, a Commission spokesperson. There are a number of subsidy schemes in the Inflation Reduction Act which include discriminatory and unnecessary local content, production or assembly requirements. One of the biggest sticking points for the Europeans is the tax credit granted for electric cars made in North America. But what is the electric vehicles tax credit? The credit is up to $7,500 per purchase and it's designed to encourage consumers to buy electric vehicles. Under previous rules, manufacturers couldn't qualify for electric vehicle tax credit after they produced more than 200,000 electric vehicles because of a production cap. The Inflation Reduction Act removed this cap, meaning that some cars made by General Motors, Toyota, and Tesla will once again be eligible to claim the credit. However, the credit has a protectionist element that requires the final assembly of electric vehicles to be done in North America to qualify. It also places restrictions on sourcing minerals used in batteries from China and other foreign entities of concern, requiring 40% sourcing by a free trade partner, increasing to 80% by 2026. Batteries themselves are required to have at least 50% North American content by 2024, increasing to 100% by 2028. The purpose of this stipulation is to not only increase investment in American clean energy supply chain, but also reduce reliance on Chinese and Russian rare earth elements essential to producing green technology. Why is the EU worried about the electric vehicle tax credit? The design of the electric vehicle tax credit is affecting European car manufacturers because the EU does not have a free trade agreement with US, and American consumers cannot use the $7,500 credit on European-made cars. This discriminatory distinction will make cars that are eligible for the credit cheaper for American consumers than those made in Europe. This unfair competition is particularly damaging the European auto producers, as the United States is the top destination for EU-built vehicles according to the European Automobile Manufacturer Association. France won't be left alone in a possible trade war on electric cars. These tensions will bring Paris and Berlin closer, as the German car industry is also particularly affected by the US measures. EU policymakers have such deep concern about the impact on their economy that the EU and US have started a joint task force to discuss European concerns and possible solutions. The European Commission hopes to convince Washington to find a diplomatic compromise for European car makers and their suppliers. If not, that leaves the EU no choice but to challenge Washington at the World Trade Organization. EU officials and diplomats said even if a new transatlantic trade war is the last thing both sides wants to spend their time and money on. The General Director of the World Trade Organization said that countries need to be very careful that whatever policies they are taking should not be discriminatory and should not favor domestic goods. The Commission, which negotiated trade issue on behalf of EU states, is in talk with Washington to address these concerns. It's also discussing options with South Korea and Japan, including the possibility of bringing the case to World Trade Organization. South Korea has already said it views the US rules that favor American-made electric vehicles and batteries as a betrayal, and that it will actively consider filing a complaint with the World Trade Organization. The EU is highly concerned about this unnecessary and damaging new trade barrier and will take the necessary steps to defend its interests, Garcia Ferrer said. The EU response will depend on actions decided by Japan and Korea and on how the US administration will implement the subsidy schemes. Some officials consider that the US may consider some of the disruptive elements or offer some solutions. What is the future of the US and EU trade cooperation? Due to Russia's invasion of Ukraine and tensions on trade with China, the United States and Europe are looking for ways to transition to a greener economy while protecting national security and securing critical supply chains. It is in the best interest of both the US and EU to find common solutions to common problems. However, the Inflation Reduction Act gives the US a step forward into the future where the US and EU opt for protectionist tax and trade policies rather than implementing principled tax policies and reducing trade barriers between them. European car makers will likely lose business in the United States, which could affect jobs in Europe. EU member states may impose protectionist tax of their own, hurting American businesses, or place retaliation EU trade penalties on US goods, ultimately hurting American consumers and workers. It is also not obvious that limiting buying options for American consumers will help bring down the cost of electric vehicles or reduce carbon emissions. It makes little sense to start a trade dispute with one of the US largest trading partners that will give China and Russia a boost when the state's goal of the policy is to hurt those foreign entities of concerns. If policymakers in the US and EU want to become less reliant on Chinese and Russian imports, then they should seek to expand trade between each other, not restrict it. US and EU policymakers should keep this lesson in mind on other issues as well. Within the next year, the EU will likely adopt some form of a carbon border adjustment mechanism. If the adopted form is a border tariff and not a true World Trade Organization compliant adjustment, it will not only hurt both economies, but it will also likely lead to carbon leakage that negatively impact the climate and possibly increase transatlantic trade disputes further. During these difficult times, it is important to work with alliances to find common solutions. Unfortunately, protectionism prompts retaliation where cooperation is needed. Thank you so much for watching. As always, if you find this content helpful, smash that like and subscribe button, turn on the notification bell to be notified every time I post a new video, and see you in the next video. Stay safe.